Thank you all for staying on to listen to this. It's two particular sites in Surrey, which have turned out to be really quite exciting and quite unexpected. Not only because they have a large number of Roman coins, there are many other aspects about the sites which are of great interest. But it's raised the question, why does Surrey have these two sites? Are there other sites, coin-rich sites in southeast England? How can we find out? And if we find that there are other sites, are they well known? Are they not well known? And what does that really say about the two sites that we've got? You'll hear me talking about geophysics and metal detecting, particularly metal detecting, because that is one of the key aspects to discovering these sites. And you'll hear me talking a certain amount about religion and religious fairs and markets. Before we get into it, as a bit of background, for those who, some of you will know a lot about this, others not so much. Roman Britain is really rather lucky in having three fantastic databases for Roman coins. And the first one really was put together by Richard Rees back in the 1990s. And he was concentrating on the well-known sites at the time that had been explored, excavated by the luminaries of the period, and they were finding significant features. They didn't really use geophysics, but it hadn't been greatly invented, equally for metal detecting. The next one that came along was the Roman Rural Settlement Project, and they took the published sites, the rural published sites. So although there's a bit of overlap with Richard Rees, it's surprisingly small. And these sites are the ones that were triggered by PPG 16, mostly excavated by developers, not all completely, but mostly. And they are not as substantial as the earlier ones, but they're still pretty substantial. And they may include a lot of timber buildings and field systems. More use of geophysics, surprisingly little use of metal detecting, really. The last database to mention has been going for a lot longer. It went back to the 1990s, actually. It's still very much there. Is almost totally, the main contributor are the metal detectorists. So they are out in the countryside. They're finding large areas of sites. Some have been explored by local societies, but it's normally there's no threat, no developer threat, so the professionals don't get a chance to excavate. The sites are rarely, I guess, have the big stone walls and big ditches. It's mostly tracks and ditches, a lot of open areas. And if there are buildings, there'd be timber buildings. And I mention that particularly because it is hard to find the buildings. And so it's difficult to know just how many buildings there might have been. The sites lend themselves to magnetometry. So where it has been done, it's usually magnetometry. Metal detecting, of course, is standard. Those three kinds of database, and they all struggle with this column on the right-hand side. Why did those coins go in the ground? Yes, of course, some were dropped accidentally through everyday life. There were some urban markets, I suppose. There is a great debate about whether there were rural markets or religious fairs. They're obvious in much of the Roman Empire. There's not so much documentary evidence for that in this country, and that some people are not sure that they ever existed. Clearly, some were offerings, and they would be tied to the religious sites. Although it's not always so easy to say exactly how the coins got in the ground. And then there are hoards, and they're quite a separate subject, and normally people try to separate those out so that you don't get confused by them. And a possibility, particularly in the countryside, is that it by chance something like a pond full of rich material might have been spread on the land as manuring, giving you the impression of the materials coming from across the land. So if you have those in the back of your mind as we progress. Now, some of you know a lot about Flexford, and some of you have excavated at Flexford. So I'm going to have to give you some background. Because we've done quite a lot of work on the site, there's a lot to say. After that, I will tell you what we can about Godstone, but it has been, although it's been excavated, it's much less so, and so there's not so much that we can say. So Flexford is just on the north of the Hog's Back. It was previously unknown, although David Bird and many others have suggested there should be a Roman road there, and David Bird has pointed to a site there or nearabouts, which would be a natural place for a posting station. Nearby are the Wanborough Roman temples. There's a villa, so that's where it is. It was excavated by society members, but we have made use of a lot of specialists, and that has been the basis of what we've done. It's also a site which has been extensively explored by metal detecting, and although we stopped work on the site in 2015, the metal detecting is still going on. And when it's bit the right weather, they're still discovering many very nice items. On the right-hand side, you can see a plan of the site. It's about 10 hectares. You can see that we found a road. We found the suggested road running across. It's bounded by two streams, as far as we can tell. The green dots are the coins, and they cover all over the site, and we've just gone over 1,000. It's just 1,003 coins have been found. If you looked at the site, the coins by period, the earlier ones are very much all over the site. The later ones concentrate in the centre. And the centre is where we found several buildings, where we think the shrine was based, and there may well have been a special tree. There's ironworking just to the north, and then in the north of the site, we've got some other buildings and a ditched enclosure. The brown smudges on the plan are a way of showing where the special finds were. So there's a kind of heat map of special finds, and you can see that the special finds are very much concentrated in the centre of the site. Down in the site, in the south, we've got a series of bust and burials, quite spectacular row of bust and burials. There's hardly anything prehistoric. We've got a few sherds of late Bronze Age pottery, and I've just learnt that some of the worked flints might suggest a Mesolithic scatter. There are not many wells, 2 or 4, but not enough, in my mind, to suggest a large settlement. A few other human creations. Most of the buildings, though, that we found are definitely timber buildings with posts and sill beams, and that means that it really is difficult to know how many buildings there might have been, because the traces of those are not picked up by geophysics, only by excavation. And although we have worked hard at the excavation, we have covered less than 2% of the site. If I start with the earliest of the Roman part, the earliest dated material is this cremation, a human cremation, with a Gallo-Belgic type of jar, which would be dated to about AD 60. That's the first piece that we have. Adjacent to it, slightly later, was another human cremation. In this case, it has half of a pig's head and some other pottery just by. In the north, there is a ditched enclosure with one exit and some other ditches around it, which make it look as if it was for animal management. And it might be just by coincidence, but we have this rather nice little head of a ram, which was found in the area, suggesting that perhaps there were sheep there. And maybe we have an enclosed farm from the early Roman period, which was changing to something a little bit more complex. Most of the coins in this area are early. We have quite a few 9 steelyard weights, and there's therefore the suggestion that perhaps there was a small market for animals organized in the north of the site. Later on, we found the road. I put a date of 150. So far, I haven't found any absolutely conclusive evidence. It might be a bit earlier. I don't think it would be any later. And we've excavated quite a lot on this, so we've got some really good results. Very clear that it's there. This is an overhead photograph of the road. You can see that it's the metalling is six meters wide. There's a verge on each side, and with the ditch, you've got a road which is 12 meters from side to side. In the center of the site, and it seems rather just after the road was built, the enclosure ditches were dug and a track appeared running north to south. We have a shrine, as you can see. It could well be that there was an interesting tree just adjacent to it, ditched enclosures around. The red boxes show you where we excavated. There is a lot of interesting stuff around there that we haven't excavated. If I look at the ditch corner, now that's right at the center of the site, and very interestingly, in a very prominent location, we found a really nice, well-constructed post hole, and in the base of that post hole, we found quite an unusual little semis of Trajan, a coin that was probably minted in the Middle East. So a noticeable site, a noticeable point at the center of the site, with many other little finds around the ditch corner. It looked as if, as people went past, they may well have made a small offering just there. Near the shrine, we found something which we call a horn pit, because it included 34 horn cores and a wide range of different animal bones. We also had parts of querns, dressed stone block, different types of CBM, and right at the bottom, a little blacksmith's half. At the bottom, and I'll show you what was there, there was a very distinctive flint. That's a cross section, and we found that the charcoal on the top was dated a lot earlier than the items within the charcoal, particularly this coin of Probus, making it suggest that there was some particular thing that had burnt or been burnt, and it may well have been the shrine, which dated from much earlier to create this particular kind of pit. Well, right at the bottom, many of you would have seen this before, there was a flint which had been adapted to appear skull-shaped. The holes were natural, but a mouth had been added. And as you looked at it, it had a little hole underneath so that you could put it on a stick. You get a very clear feeling that somebody had created that, and that was some kind of sacred object, and it was at the bottom of this pit. And these rituals, which would have dated when they were done, was about AD 300. We're really looking a lot earlier. Just adjacent here, you see other pits, two, one above another. The whole thing was capped by a gorgeous echinoid, and one of them had this particularly interesting antler within it. Well, down at the bottom of the south of the site, as I mentioned, the bust and burials, these are cremation burials. And this drawing on the left gives you an idea of, I don't know about the splendor, but they were complex, expensive burials where the timber was placed above the pit, and the body would have been on a bier above that. Timber fired, everything falls down into the pit, and then it's sealed. It's not frequent in this country. It's much more of a process that you might find in Germany or Northern Gaul. Normally, these are part of a larger cemetery. They would be maybe 10%, 5% of a larger cemetery. If that was true here, then we would have a large cremation cemetery, but we didn't explore the area enough to know the answer to that. Those are plans of the Forbuston burials. They have flues to try to make sure that the air can get into the underneath, enough air can get there to burn it properly. The site has a lot of pottery, so much pottery that it's difficult to believe it wasn't a significant settlement. From our trenches, we had nearly 30,000 sherds, and this slide is designed to show you that the jars were in majority. Then there were bowls, and you can see there were some special items, but we also had traces of over 50 pedestal jars, and these are very often associated with offerings or incense or something a little bit more special. And to find 50 of them is quite unusual. We found a lot of weights, steelyard weights. We're up to 25 now. For anyone who hasn't seen it before, steelyard weight is the green item. It hangs from a steelyard, as you can see. And as you move it out, so the weight that can be weighed increases. And on some of them, if you can turn the steelyard around, and then you can move it out, because it's the design changes the fulcrum, that can weigh anything between 1 or 40 times the weight of the weight. So they're quite clever, they're engineered, and they're definitely very Roman. So we found 25 in many different sizes, ranging from just 74 grams to almost a kilo in some cases. So then comes the question, why have we found all these weights? And in fact, we found probably more weights at Flexford than on almost any other site that I can identify. It might have something to do with tax collection. It's difficult to think that we found those weights and it was not to do with weighing. People have said, well, maybe they would have been made at the site, but when you look at them, the designs are all different. People have said, well, maybe they were collecting up scrap to melt down. It's possible, but if that's the case, why did we find them all over the site? Why did it not happen anywhere else? And why wasn't there a lot of other scrap lead that would be useful? So you tend to come to the feeling that this has got something to do with weighing things, and fairs and markets might be a better explanation, in which case they're probably linked to religious events, and they're probably the sorts of periodic markets that you see very often in the other parts of the Roman Empire. We found plenty of brooches. We're up to 58 now. That's just a rather nice one that was complete, but there's a list of brooches on the left there. And although they do go right through from the 400 years of the Roman period, there are a substantial number of early ones. And so there really was early activity leading to brooches going into the ground. There is a small amount of military or items which sometimes are suggested to have military associations in the designs of the body armor or belt materials. There's a lead oil lamp. Whether it's actually military or whether it's an official or a soldier that had retired or something, we can't say, but they are on the site. We have some very nice pieces, a little inscribed item which boldly says that it's on a jar, a copper alloy jar, and it boldly says it was freely given from the wealth of, and then the bit that really matters isn't there. Have some searching to do, and a nice little female head. And finds are still going on. So nobody, or very few of you have seen this before. It was found by Dave and Murray in April. Of all the expert Roman finds people that have looked at it, nobody knows what it is yet. It's quite small. You can see the scale on the drawings on the right-hand side. But there it is. It's a creature with an S-shaped neck, an elongated head, two stubby ears, an oval body with an insert, something at the back that might suggest a hinge, so something that was hinged and went over it, and four legs, only one of which is the right length. Three have got little bits missing. So if anybody knows what that is, or can point us in a good direction, then your information would be gratefully received. Just near the road, we found a hoard, all in a cauldron. The cauldron's there on the right-hand side. A really nice Samian patera. As you can see, some nice pottery, really nice glass, and a lot of pewter relating to bowls and plates. So all together in a hoard, and we're now trying to bring that information together to try to assess what can we learn about the site from that hoard. So I come on to the coins. I'm going to talk more about the coins as we go on. The only ones I've chosen to illustrate here are two late coins because they show that the site was still being used in some way, probably as late as 420. So it definitely starts from just after around about AD 50, 60, and it runs right through to 420. Perhaps the most significant thing, apart from the sheer quantity of coins, is that half of them date from pre-AD 260. And you will hear me going on about this in the next part of the talk, because that's significant and unusual. So why did the finds go in the ground? We really don't think that there's evidence for hoards. They don't look like hoards. And if they were manuring, which is theoretically possible, I suppose, somebody would have to have found a lot of rich soil from somewhere else and then spread it over a Roman site, which seems to be most unusual. There is a pond, but it's much too small to produce the amount of material you'd need to spread all over this site. So we don't think either of those are big explanations. I think some definitely are religious offerings, and there's a blue circle here which suggests that most of them are probably in that area. Some of them, the ones on the road, for instance, were, I think, quite reasonable to imagine they did fall out of people's pockets. And maybe some of the ones around here did as well, and perhaps around the smithing. A little bit was buried for retrieval, I think. That was the hoard. But looking across the site, there's a great deal which isn't explained. There are coins and other finds all the way across the site. And that is where you begin to think that may well be the evidence for a periodic market which are linked to religious festivals. Well, there's a picture which is remarkably similar to my impression of the site. We're looking north along that track. We've got the shrine and possible tree to the left, some quite substantial buildings on the right, and some newer ones to the north. I have to say that this is not my drawing. I wish it was. It's taken from the cover of a very nice publication about a site in Northamptonshire. I've reversed it because the reverse makes it look better, but that's probably what it looked like. So we had Flexford with these statistics across a 10-hectare site and a Roman road running through it. And as we were working on that, it became clear that there's another one across at Godstone, which is the other side of Red Hill. And there are least 908 coins from that, similar number of small finds, and this similar proportion, in that case it's 53% of these coins are pre-AD 260. Now, as we go on, you'll see these are unusual sites in the size and the quantity, and we have two of them. On both sites, there appears to be hardly ever any late Iron Age, hardly any medieval. So they're clearly Roman sites. Godstone is very much a site identified and explored by one man, David Hunt. There was a time team excavation in 2007. I'll show you some pictures of that. It has a similar sort of feature that the early coins are all over the site, and then the later ones tend to concentrate towards the center. Wessex and others, including ourselves, did quite a bit of magnetometry, and you can see that there are enclosed ditches, and they identified a road running through the site and some other features of interest which they wanted to excavate. So I have put the coins on the top of that magnetometry. You can see this is the center of the site, and that's where the concentrations are, but there are other concentrations as well. I'm going to go show you the coins by period. These are the 1st century ones all over the site. And that's true still for the 2nd century coins. As we get to the 3rd century, they begin to coalesce. And then in the 4th century, it's quite clear that they're much more concentrated in the center. Well, Time Team were there for their 3 days, but the weather, at least on the 3rd day, was absolutely atrocious. And they were desperately trying to get some results in appalling weather. These photographs, I think, sum it up very nicely. Throughout the program, it's series 14, episode 11, called The Road to the Relics. It's freely available online. It's worth listening to it because you get some quite dedicated archaeologists discussing whether there was a temple, whether it's a market. They start off believing it was a temple, and although, as you can see, the excavations were hindered, they sort of came around to the view that they had no evidence for a temple and it was a market. But it's interesting to listen to them debating it. And of course, the excavation was too short to prove it one way or the other. There may well be a temple there yet to be found. That's how they viewed it, looking down on the site. There's the north-south road coming from London going down to the south. You can see the center of the site. You can see the magnetometry. So here we had two, and they were previously unsuspected. Nobody really thought these sites existed. Similar size, similar arrays of finds, ditched enclosures, open areas, a lot of timber buildings, certainly a shrine on each site yet to be found at Godstone. Both of them had around about 1,000 Roman coins, 300 metal finds. To some extent, they are presumably roadside settlements, although at Flexford, for instance, the settlement is to the north of the road, and we didn't find anything alongside the road. Godstone, I think, more clearly around the road. I think that any site like that would have had its own shrine, but whether they were originally religious sites that became settlements, or whether the religion was just part of the site as it grew, you can discuss. Did they have markets? Were those linked to religious festivals? Were there officials there? Was something else involved? Sometimes people suggest that a site like that would have had a political function, even if it was just local politics. There may be other things too. Now, For those that are not familiar with it, I have to give you some idea about the coins, because that's what we're going to talk about a lot now. On the left-hand side, you can see the early ones. I haven't put a gold one on because we didn't find one. But the copper alloy ones you can see, and the silver ones, they're large, they're heavy, and very distinctive. As you move into the later period, the coins become lighter, smaller, right through to the end of the 4th century, until they're something like 5% in weight compared with the earlier coins. The earlier ones are called Godstone. That's a series that stayed constant right through. There was a gap in the 2nd century when very few new copper coins came to this country. And the consequence was that those that were already here became more and more worn. And so it's difficult to know when they went in the ground, because you don't know with a worn coin whether it had been in use for 30 years, 50 years, 130 years. But they pretty much were all in the ground, or they'd gone off to be remelted or whatever by 260 when currency reform started. You had one in 260, which is why that is such an important date and why we keep talking about pre and post 260. And then another one in 296, after which the coins really got smaller and smaller. They were also reissued much more often, which means that they probably did go in the ground more quickly after they were struck. Now, in Roman Britain as a whole, something like 16% of the finds are on the left-hand side, and something like 84% are on the right-hand side. That's the figure for Roman Britain. As I've said, for Flexford and Godstone, it's about 50-50. Now, a lot of studies have started to bring this idea of big data to studying Roman Britain. Richard Rees, I've mentioned, Jeremy Taylor, Philip Walton have contributed important works, and the two other studies that I discussed at the beginning. This is Richard Rees's important book. He gave meticulous details of the coins from 140 major sites. And it's important because amongst the coin people, it's very well known. So it's a solid base. This is the Atlas of Roman Rural Settlement, which just showed you how many types, how many traces there are across Britain. Philippa Walton took the records from the PAS database at the time and drew some important conclusions. This is the Roman Rural Settlement Project, which looked at all the published rural sites by about 2016. And they found that the great majority of rural sites have few coins. Many have none. Over 70% have less than 10. But there's a small proportion of sites which have quite a few coins. I've taken 50 as a basis where sites start to have coins, and something like 14% fall into that category. And the PAS database, which I discussed, for those that may not know, it's organized by the British Museum. They've now got 1.6 million objects, I think, all periods. There are experts locally, national experts. It's very much what metal detectorists find. The sites are often not excavated. They may have some geophysics. They're often wide area sites. And of course, they're mostly rural. And from the expert detectorists, we have precise find spots and precise descriptions, all of which are available online, free, and it allows you to look very closely at the finds across the country. If you haven't done it, I really recommend browsing through the database to see what there is. They've got 400,000 Roman finds. As you can see, 3/4 are Roman coins. But even at this level, I can say that over half the coins coming from these coin-rich sites. Now, coin-rich sites in the countryside would not have been heard of some years ago. So to find that there are many coin-rich sites in the countryside is a different thing. This is just an example of what you can do. I've taken Flexford in each case. I asked the question, show me all the Roman coins around Flexford. Flexford on the left-hand side is that pink dot, and you can see where the coins are. They're color-coded with the quantities. And then ask the same question for the brooches, and that's on the right-hand side. There are many, many questions you can ask. Just out of interest, because we have a lot of Antonine coins at Flexford, ask the question, well, who else has got Antonine coins? This is a picture. Caerleon has the largest number in that area. Isle of Wight has quite a few. Piercebridge up in the north has a lot. And Flexford comes out as the fourth site in all that area with a concentration of coins from Antoninus Pius. It's that feeling when you do it and you think, oh, goodness me, what have we got? Now, some people say, beware PAS, because metal detectorist results have got all kinds of snags with them. And that's, of course, true. But what I think is that Rees found a pattern with his the coins that he analysed, and all of that was done separately without detecting. And the PAS results, which have come from, they've been collected in quite different ways. The results match, as you will see in a minute. And bear in mind that many of the detectorists are real enthusiasts, very skillful. They're backed by experts. And they love protective sites. So when they've got a protective site, they tend to work it for years and years and years. So to have thoroughly explored sites is not unusual. So they shouldn't be seen as in isolation. And I suspect now that the sample sizes are getting big enough so that whatever variations there are, and there are, to be truthful, the sample sizes are big enough to show you what there is to find. Well, I said there was I didn't say it. Richard Rees was the first person to make clear that there's a pattern to coin finds from Roman Britain. The pattern is that 16% of the finds come from the pre-260, were struck pre-260, and 84%, and this is all over the country, were struck post-AD 260. And the pattern of finds, you divide the period up into what often called Rees periods. Some of those are just one emperor, some of them might be different. The pattern is very similar, whether you're looking at the Rees results, which have one type of method of collection, and the PAS results, which are a completely different type of collection. Despite that, the patterns are the same. But when I showed you the pictures of those coins, you've got to remember that the later coins are much smaller. And if you try to relate them to gold, then those later ones are worth much less than the earlier coins. There's a lot of currency debasement going on, and it makes comparison difficult. You really can't say that if you've got 5.25 more of the later coins, that equals 5.25 more times more wealth, more activity. You could even argue to stretch that because they're worth less, it means less. But I don't want to do that. I just want to make the point that you can't jump to the conclusion that more coins mean more wealth. You can also ask the PAS database whether the Roman finds are normal or exceptional. And interestingly, you can look at these different periods. This is now for Southeast England. I've done the figures. The coins per year found are roughly consistent at around about 90 or 100. So that's for every year of the period, On the PAS database, there are about 90 coins. Except for the post-Roman period, when there are far more coins. It's got the figure of 650 there. But there are far more coins found from that period. The other thing that's quite different is that Roman coins have far more copper content. Silver is much more common in the other periods, and in that late Roman period, it's almost entirely copper. So Roman finds are exceptional, or at least the late Roman ones are particularly exceptional. Well, there's a pattern to the coin finds from Roman Britain, but from what I've been saying, you won't be surprised that Flexford and Godstone are different. What you can see here is that on the left-hand side, Flexford and Godstone, that's the orange and the red, show far more coins from the early period, and naturally, therefore, the proportion is less in the later period. They're similar to each other, they're different from everything else. So we come back to the question, oh, right, so we've got two coin-rich sites in Surrey, which we didn't expect, but there it is, we've got them. Are there any more? Looking around southeast England, what can we find? Well, I had to define what a coin-rich site would be. I chose to define it as at least 50 coins from between 1 and 100 hectares, with a density of at least 1 per hectare. Richard Rees has 35. The Roman Rural Settlement Project, there we found 142. And from the PAS database, this is just in southeast England, 298. Now, for some reason, there we go. We can look at them also related to the Iron Age coins. So those are all the Iron Age coins. I was surprised actually how many there are. And as your eyes start to get used to it, you can see that there are concentrations. And you can also see that there appear to be tracks running across. The one to the north of London, it ties up very much with the Icknield Way. The one to the south ties up very much with the route across through the Downs, and then a route in Sussex. Interesting, the concentration in the Isle of Wight, and interesting, the concentration in northeast Kent, particularly because you'll see in a minute that that concentration dies out in the Roman period. So we're going to walk through now from the late Iron Age through the Roman period, just looking at where the coins are in southeast England. There's the Iron Age. This is the early Roman. Isle of Wight still significant. Those routes still seem to be visible, but East Anglia, you can see, is becoming much more widely settled, whereas Kent, the coin finds are much less. Big gap in the Thames Valley. Moving into the 2nd century, pattern rather the same. East Anglia gets busier. In the 3rd century, do you remember I mentioned that big shortage of coins, which means that coins that were struck in that period are much less usual, and you can see that now because there are far fewer of them, although the layout is similar. And then suddenly, from 260, it all changes, masses of coins. The layout is similar, but many more coins. As we move into the 4th century, pattern still much the same, large quantities of coins. Kent is still not a big producer. Middle of the 4th century. And then towards the end of the Roman period, the pattern there stays the same. And just for interest, this is the early medieval. So although there are far fewer coins, those patterns still seem to transfer to the early medieval. Now, it's possible then to use that and to do a bit of wizardry with QGIS to ask it to find the coin-rich areas, and it does. Now, this is what it tends to find. There are two different scales here, as you can see. But here is a group of, two groups of coins, actually, that it finds in Sussex, near to Stane Street. There's Stane Street, and this is at Hulnecker Hill. So there are two separate concentrations of coins just there. This one is Flexford. This is a different kind of site. To Greywell, near Odiham. There's a nice little river that runs along here, and there are coins on both sides. And there's a Roman road that runs past. And then a completely different kind of site. This is the hilltops of Berkshire near Wantage, where there are numbers of concentrations of coins on the tops of the hills. So I'm now going to map these. These are the 35 sites that I picked out from Rees's list. And not surprisingly, these are on the roads, and you can visualize where they are in terms of the Roman towns. If we look at the Roman Rural Settlement Survey, now they have some that they may well be on the roads, but you can see they're spreading out more into the countryside. A lot of them are still on roads, but they're not in the same places as the Rees sites, by and large. Now, if we put the PAS sites on, you can see it's completely different source of the sites. Much more in the countryside. Yes, for sure, a lot more in East Anglia. They're not duplicating the other sites. Even in the Isle of Wight, you can see that there are plenty of sites to the west, whereas the only PAS site is on the only rural settlement surveys on the east. So although there's a little bit of overlap, the different methods involved are finding different sites. There tots up to 475 of these coin-rich sites in southeast England. Flexford and Godstone are two of quite a big group. This is what some of them look like. So this is a villa. Villas don't tend to have a lot of coins, but Luddingston does. A good, solid roadside settlement with industry at West Hawk Farm. I don't understand why there aren't more coins for this one. The metal detectoring may have got there too late. I don't know. Here we have the temple and shrines at Springhead. 768 coins. A lot of coins. Bear in mind, though, that Godstone and Flexford have more. It's difficult to find reconstruction drawings of periodic rural markets in Roman Britain. I've had to take a nice one from a recent Spanish holiday in Gandia. I wanted to show you this, as I showed you the map of the finds. These are the hills to the south of Wantage. 1,500 coins are recorded, but I know that there are thousands more because this is an area that has been absolutely invaded by groups of metal detectorists coming from all over and perhaps all over Europe. The finds liaison officers did their absolute best to record it, but they say that they really can't say how many coins were found. And they're all over on the tops of these hilltops. So here are the sites with the really big ones in stars. So these are the early coins, 3260. Quite a few sites with not so many, so less than 10, and then there's those in between. So Flexford and Godstone stand out as two of the sites with the most early coins. Well, you can see that, as you might imagine, the Civitas capitals, Colchester, Richmond, St Albans, etc., have many more. This can't be a figure for all coins ever found in London. It's just the ones that Richard Rees had at the time. And then you have three more recently discovered ones, one at Heybridge here, and then Flexford and Godstone. So they're standing out Flexford and Godstone are standing out as sites with a lot of pre-260 coins. I'm going to go to the later coins, and suddenly you can see far more bigger sites, much more activity north of London, and even the sites which didn't have so many before have far more coins. The south has some growth, but nothing like the same as the north. And in fact, you can map that, and you can show that to the north, what I call the pink area, the number of coins increased by 6 times, whereas to the south, it's just under 3 times. Now, why there should be so much difference is a good question to discuss. I don't know the answer for sure. What you can also see, because I put the temples, the known temples on, is that there's no clear correlation between temple sites and lots of coins. So quite a lot of the coins, some of them may well have been deposited at temples, but quite a lot were not deposited at known temples. But the concentration that I mentioned is very clear. This is just for the PAS, because that's the only place we can really get the data from. But of all the coins found, how many of them came from those coin-rich sites? Well, in the pink area, which is the densest, as many as 63% are coming from those coin-rich sites. The blue area, not so dense, but even there, it's 50% or so. And yet those sites occupy far less than 1% of the area of southeast England. So there clearly is something about coin-rich rural sites, which means that most of the coins, the Roman coins, are being found there. And that is a Roman feature. It is true that a little bit more of the Iron Age coins than you might expect also come from those sites, but nothing like the same density. And maybe it went a bit further into the medieval period, but not the same density. These are the figures that matter. It's also true for many of the small finds. They're not evenly distributed. So bracelets, nail cleaners, rings, brooches are more concentrated on those coin-rich sites. Harness buckles, less concentrated. Steelyards, somewhere in the middle. So it looks as if there is an offering content there, which presumably relates to some of the coins, but it looks as if there are other activities also. And just for fun, it is possible to take each one of those 21 Reese periods and to rank each of the coin-rich sites for each period and to see which has the most coins. And then you can ask, well, if you had, it's a kind of top 10. If you were in the top 10 for period 1 or 2, 3, how many periods are you in the top 10? And does that suggest which of these coin-rich sites were more popular, more successful? You can list them, and here we have on the right-hand side, so the 3 which consistently produce those coins are Ashwell, Wantage and Wenhaston. Then come Flexford and Godstone, and then a whole lot of others afterwards. And you can even ask the question to yourself, does this mean that they were the most popular Roman markets at the time? And are they along a route, a kind of market route? You can certainly look at it and wonder. I'm just going to, before I finish, look at Ashwell in particular. I hadn't heard about it until I started to play around with these coins, but it is a well-known local site, or sorry, it's a locally well-known site. It has a coin-rich area, as you can see, 1,800 coins from there. It's close to the Icknield Way. Today, it's close to the boundaries of Cambridgeshire and Hertfordshire. One of the sources of the River Cam starts nearby, and that runs right through the coin-rich area. Not so far away, There is an Iron Age camp. There's a most interesting Roman town at Baldock, where the excavator says they found 21 different Roman cemeteries. Icknield Way runs across, Roman roads there and there. Much debate about whether that can be proved to be a Roman road. It stands as a Roman route. Another coin-rich area just to the south. There's an awful lot of archaeology in just that part. And then I discovered quite happily that it has been beautifully written up by Ralph Jackson and Gilbert Burley. And it was written up because halfway through the metal detectorists exploring it, they come across a stunning hoard with these gold leaf plates, a wonderful statue. The statue is engraved with the name of the goddess, so they know it was Senuna. And they've done a beautiful job of writing it all up. And then Gilbert Burley did a lovely job of writing up some modest excavations that they had. So that's the bling, and that is the magnetometry. They suggest that the temple is this quite large area just here, and the find was just by. But two things to stand out. One is a very large area of tracks, ditches, presumably a settlement area, which they suggested could have been related to activities for the temple, maybe people working at the temple, but also people visiting and making offerings. And then large open areas, which doesn't seem to have very much, which they thought might be for the festivals, the fairs. Interestingly, they didn't know, because it came afterwards, I think, where most of the coins were coming from. So many coins from here, but the coins spread much further to the north and to the east. And so it seems that there's a lot of activity going on in addition to what we know here. So there's Ashwell, top of the top 10, and a really interesting coin-rich Roman rural site. So I'm just going to try and sum up before. Flexford and Godstone are coin-rich rural sites, and they're part of a pattern of Roman coin-rich sites. They do seem to be rural religious sites. I think that there's a lot of evidence that there were some periodic markets there. There is settlement. Because it's timber buildings, it's difficult to know how much. There is industry, but difficult to know how much. Really hard to know how many buildings there were. I feel that Flexford is not perhaps as many as you might think, but it's got to be proven. And you get this strong sense that although it was through the Roman period, that they're more local than they are Roman. So before AD 260, that's that watershed I keep talking about, Flexford and Godstone are exceptional for the number and the proportion of the early coins. It looks as if there were shrines and markets there. There is some evidence that there must have been some local decision making to make it happen. Maybe they were a meeting point. Perhaps there were some officials there. Maybe there was some tax, in-kind tax collection. After AD 260, they're still active. By any measure, they're active, but lots of other sites have got more coins. But we still have, bearing in mind that the other coins, the later coins, are smaller, we have this question, just because you've got more coins, does that mean that you've got more trade, wealth, or religion? Or are we looking at the coins of the poor? So I'm going to leave it there. That's how I think Flexford looked around about AD 300. And that's the talk for tonight.